Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
And you can look it up too. There's a really good page in Wikipedia on EFBs, electronic flight bags, and that one will explain all the different classes, the 1, 2, and 3. We're currently running with a class 2, which allows like a standalone iPad. Mine would be either wired or Bluetooth to the plane's own GPS, so it has a very sweet nav solution. But then the next iteration would be, people actually buying some sort of a tablet or another screen for the interior of the cockpit, and then that would be integrated into the plane.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. This is an episode I've wanted to record for many years now. My guest today is Milton Davis, who is a pilot for Hawaiian Airlines. Hawaiian Airlines outfits every pilot with an iPad as their electronic flight bag, EFB as you'll hear in this discussion, and has done so for many years now. In this episode, we dive into his background with Apple products, how he got into flying, and his experiences using the iPad as a pilot. If you do listen and have any inquiries for him, he's offered to come back again, so send in any questions you may have as you're listening, and I'd love to cover those in a future episode. You can send those to iPadProsPodcast@gmail.com. You can also message me on Mastodon at tchan@mastodon.world. As a reminder, you can support this podcast over patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. Every dollar is greatly, greatly appreciated and really does mean the world. So thank you with all my heart to those that do support the podcast at either patreon.com/iPadPros or directly in Apple Podcasts. With that, here's my interview with Milt. Enjoy. Welcome to Podcast Milt. I'm really excited for this conversation because I've seen Apple promoting the use of iPads for pilots pretty much since the iPad came out. It's been a while. And you are a pilot that uses the iPad, so welcome.
Thank you.
So kind of to start, a bit of your background. How long have you been flying? Kind of what size planes do you work with?
Yeah, I'm mostly military in my background. So since 1985, when I went to pilot training, a little bit before that, just at a college level with flying smaller planes, Cessnas. But then I went through Williams and Arizona and got rated as a pilot in the Air Force, and then heavy jets after that. So C-130s, all variants really, E's, H-1s, H-2s, and H-3s later with the Hawaii Air National Guard. I was stationed in Japan for 4 years, for my very first 4 years, and then I did 3 years in Germany flying a little Learjet, which is kind of a civilian-based commercial jet, but more like 6 to 8 passengers. The Air Force had them in a variety called a C-21, and that's why I actually first encountered like a handheld GPS, not something integrated into the aircraft, but that would have been 90 to 93, so long ago.
Okay.
We used a little Trimble, like a handheld GPS, in order to make sure the nav suite on board the plane was sweet before we took off.
Like a calibrated certain almost, or?
Yeah, or in some cases, I would take what was on the handheld. I would set it on the wing while I was doing the walk around. Yeah. When I came back, it would have a pretty sweet, GPS solution. I could type that into the nav suite on board the Lear, and it had the ability to interrogate terrestrial-based, like VORs and TACANs, and then it built its own accurate position from that, and we would go down the airways like that.
That's really cool. Yeah. So
it didn't have anything built in at all.
Okay. Yeah. So when you started, definitely no iPads back then.
No, that was well before that. It was all paper-based pubs.
So you've seen the
we would carry plates,
as we'll get to in a bit here.
Yeah.
So a question I had, a friend had me include this in the questions as far as airplane mode that we're always asked about.
Sure.
Is this mostly nonsense? I feel at least for like Bluetooth headphones, it seems a little silly. Do cellular radios on phones really impact your communication with towers, or how does that all work?
I don't think so. Okay. I have not really encountered that myself. I imagine it's probably based, and no slam against the FAA, but they kind of go back a while.
It's an American thing, right? In Japan and other European countries, do they care?
No, they don't have jurisdiction. It's just purely U.S. based.
Yeah,
they have their own. equivalent.
In the
But I think it's probably something that predates.
right?
Yeah.
In the equivalents over there, do they even bother mentioning airplane mode? Is it primarily United States?
I don't know if I've heard that on a public announcement on a foreign carrier. I
Right.
don't think I have.
Yeah. Okay.
So, it might predate 3G. It might be something more back when we had edge technology and different signals that were closer to the spectrum. But I don't think 5G does. We do have concerns in our aircraft with 5G that can impact our radio altimeter when we get close to airfields.
Okay.
So we have to verify the actual given altitude basis the height above the ground and what the GPS is, what we're getting from the radio altimeter to make sure it's accurate.
Yeah.
Make sure that the 5G is not interfering with it. So
right. So you can do a safe landing, obviously. Yeah.
right. Otherwise, it has the capability to kind of throw off everything as far as feet to the ground. We get calls at 1,000 feet and 500 feet. It starts counting down as you get close. Those kinds of things could be biased by a strong 5G signal.
Okay.
And I haven't experienced it, but I just know the spectrums are really close with what we have for our radio altimeter and what the 5G is.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I heard.
And I got to say,
I'm
I'm an operator. I'm not an expert, so I just
right.
kind of know what I learn as I go. But I'm not an expert in these fields.
Yeah,
so.
absolutely. So, back to the Apple stuff, because we're going to talk about the iPad quite a bit here. I can tell just based on your email address that you are an old-time Apple user. You have a prized Mac.com email back from the .Mac days, and Mobile Me came out in 2008, so this is pre then. What's been your history with Apple products? Like, what was your first Mac, and how quickly did you embrace iPhone and iPad and all that?
Yeah, I think I had two Macs that were really my only home computer starting with in 1993.
Yeah.
So probably I had something that was past the classic Mac. I think they called it a Performa back then.
Yeah.
It was not a pretty nondescript set of boxes. And then I think I had two of those and ended up getting one of the cubes, like the graphic, great looking,
Nice.
the old iMacs, one of those.
Yeah.
And then just kind of kept going forward. I found now I'm on an iMac or a Mac Mini because it's so easy to hook up other peripherals and to change out just that one little box now.
Yeah, no, the Mac Mini is a great little device and keeps getting better. As far as the iPad, how has that been for you? Like, when did you get your first iPad? What are the different ones you've had over the years?
I got the iPad version 2, I think shortly after I left the store, because a lot of us could kind of tell that there was something that was going to be coming that was going to cover the tablet, but it had not been announced.
Yeah.
We had, our own concepts and everything. But I had a 2 I picked up and had that for several years and actually flew with it at my current job pre-having an EFB. I had a standalone GPS that would go in the windowsill by a company called Dual, D-U-A-L. You can still purchase them on Amazon.
Yeah.
Very cost effective. And so I could run with a moving map and plates on that, which was nice. That was probably 2012.
Okay. And your current iPad or iPads, what are you rocking these days?
Yeah, I've currently got a company issued one. It's a version 7 on the base model iPad. It's this one right here.
Yeah.
And it's been serving me good. We're getting ready to change them out. And I think Jerome is looking at where the cost of it's going to be effective enough to get pros for all the pilots or whether we're going to go with the base model.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, we need to update it because there's a little bit of latency in some of the apps.
Yeah.
So hopefully that'll cure it. Personally, I carry a Mini. I love the Mini for the size factor.
Yeah.
And I've got the version, I think it's 6, where it's got the button and cover.
bezel-less and all that, yeah.
Yeah, right. That has a full screen.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, but I had a 4 before that, and I think I had a 3 before that. So it's been a great traveling tool.
Nice. Yeah, and something that Apple has, pointed out about the iPad Mini, a small form factor, is like it's great for pilots. Is the smaller iPad Mini better in the cockpit? Like, if you had the option, would you prefer the Mini or would you prefer a larger screen to work with?
I like the larger screen personally because the cockpit I fly in, I'm in an Airbus now, a 330.
Yeah.
So a much larger aircraft. And at night and stuff, it's well lit. The smaller one, I think if you're flying privately, if you had like a Cessna, you're learning. I've seen some setups where people have it on like a lap a strap for their leg strap.
Hmm.
They'll put it there or mount it someplace in the cockpit. And yeah, that the smaller might be good. Some of them, I mean, it has pretty good signal pickup on its own with the GPS.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, they're not bad. And they use a program, I think generally in the smaller planes in general aviation, they're using, we use Jeppesen and they use, I got to look it up here, Foreflight.
Okay.
So Foreflight is something I've been playing with, but I'm not as familiar with because I didn't come out of that world. But
Yeah.
most of the people going through training all are using Foreflight. And in a lot of cases, I texted a friend of mine today and asked her what she was training with and working with, and she uses a Mini with Foreflight when she's training, and then she's using a full screen across the ramp over here at Mokulele with the Caravan flying commercially.
Okay. Yeah, Foreflight I've heard
Yeah.
a bunch about. So that's used both privately and commercially. Or
I think some carriers, but I don't
mostly
know. I know
privately?
Mokulele when I saw them, mostly privately, and some of the small carriers because
Okay.
that's involved with a lot of training,
Yeah.
and they both have their strengths. I actually I run both. I bought a personal membership to Foreflight, and I have that. I don't often or I don't always use it because I've got the Jeppesen one in my company one,
Yeah.
but sometimes they kind of cover and do a little bit different functions.
Okay. And as far as accessories and cases, anything notable? You mentioned like a leg strap that some people use.
Yeah, some people in really small aviation would do that. With us, we have a mount that's built into the windowsill,
Mhm.
and the case actually snaps into it, and the case is called pivot.
Yeah.
So you can see that little recess there just snaps right on the bar.
Oh, nice.
You put it in there and holds it, and so you can rotate it in any aspect you need. The plates are probably better observed with a portrait landscape,
Yeah.
and then I use like the moving map. I'll use it more to a landscape view.
Oh, wow. So we haven't mentioned this, but you fly for Hawaiian Airlines, and it sounds like they've
I do.
really embraced this. If they're like you're able to mount it into the actual dashboard area, like
It's a sideboard.
Sideboard,
So like,
okay.
if you would look over where the side window, it goes directly below that,
Okay,
where there was
I
just
see.
kind of an open spot. Yeah. More recent developments in some of the newer design aircraft have EFBs that incorporate that into the actual dash.
Oh,
But
wow.
that's not what we're doing.
yeah.
And you can look it up too. There's a really good page in Wikipedia on EFBs, electronic flight bags,
Mhm.
and that one will explain all the different classes, the 1, 2, and 3. We're currently running with a class 2,
Okay.
which allows like a standalone iPad. Mine would be either wired or Bluetooth to the plane's own GPS, so it has a very
Oh.
sweet nav
Yeah.
solution.
Nice.
But then the next iteration would be, people actually buying some sort of a tablet or another screen for the interior of the cockpit, and then that would be integrated into the plane.
Okay.
So, yeah, I've seen that on like an Airbus 330, like a newer version, like they have an Airbus 330 Neo
Mhm.
with more efficient engines, and it adds 2 more screens outboard of the existing 4 we have
Yeah.
for the EFB.
That's
So-
very cool. And if it's
Yeah.
wireless, is that a Bluetooth connection? Is there a Wi-Fi on that air, or how would it connect wirelessly?
Yeah, you can do either wired through, there's what's called a TIM, which hooks into the aircraft's GPS and IRUs.
Mhm.
So ours has 3 laser ring IRUs for GPS, or for inertial set, and then
Yeah.
those also get fed by 2 separate GPSs. There's a box in there that puts it all together for you, but you could wire into it or you can Bluetooth into it.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah, I was going to ask if they outfit you with cellular-enabled iPads, because I know those iPads also have GPS internally, but it sounds like that's not even needed since you guys just hook into the plane's onboard GPS.
Right, and that's going to be a lot more accurate with the antenna array and everything.
Yeah. So you mentioned iPad 2 is kind of when you started using iPads. What have been some of your favorite kind of changes to either the OS or hardware to the iPad over the years in regards to piloting? Has anything really been a big upgrade over the years for that?
I think it's just generally been incremental improvements in the iOS. It's been nice, but nothing really stands out. We did use Jeppesen on another tool before. We had a Surface Pro.
Mhm.
And so going from that with Jeppesen to Jeppesen on this one was kind of a nice upgrade for us. because the iPad was more stable. It didn't fail. The Surface Pro was a great, like a little computer in the plane, but it was maybe a bit too much, for what we were doing. Our needs are pretty simple.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I'd assume most of the time you wire in, and does it also charge the iPad with that? Or, yep.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a USB-A connection to the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
So that can give it power as well as position. I just take it a step further and actually link it Bluetooth to the actual nav suite. So then I can walk around with it. I can be sitting in the center chair and not actually plugged in and still have a moving map and have everything I need.
Nice. So. Okay. And the battery on that thing lasts for a 6-hour flight is typical for you, or?
Yeah, 6 to 10 hours. We have to have it charged to a minimal level before we take off, or we'll have to swap it out and get another one.
Yeah.
But then that charging capability with plane usually works fine.
Okay.
If it doesn't, we have a plug where we can plug in like with our own adapter, and I can use a USB-C and charge it up really quickly.
Okay.
So
nice.
It's never really an issue. Yeah, I have a standalone battery pack too. I have a pretty big one that can power pretty much everything.
Oh, nice.
As we're going.
Mm-hmm.
So if I need to, I could plug into that if something really went radically wrong and still have at least a moving map and everything I needed to land,
Yeah, excellent. And so the OS has improved over the years, but I'm guessing the apps themselves have probably changed and improved dramatically since this first was a thing. So how has the evolution of that been?
It's been really good because we use a company called Jeppesen.
Mm-hmm.
I think the folks that are working on our stuff is currently up in Washington State, and it's just it's gotten better and better throughout the years. So literally everything from a moving map display on whatever chart you want to have, like a high IFR chart or a low VFR chart if you want to see road structures or more details like that, and then plates and information for actually landing. So without boring you, we have plates that show us how we're going to land with like an instrument landing system or like a GPS approach or like a VOR approach. We have all those on that app where you can just pick it up and look at it.
Okay. And so walk me through a bit, like at the beginning when you're first using this, what was kind of the baseline feature set and what were some of the major kind of additions that you guys have seen added over the years?
Right. Yeah, initially I used it more just as a moving map and to kind of augment what we had because we were, of course, carrying paper charts, which was like several volumes and quite a bit of weight. It'd be like carrying around maybe 4 old school phone books, like the white pages. Like you'd have to pull out what plates you wanted, and there was this constant upgrade process with putting new charts in and taking the old ones out.
Yeah.
Then when we went over to the electronic flight bag, the EFB, then that got replaced by basically just pushing a button and it would update itself, professionally. So that was a huge win for us. It saved a lot of time with changing those things out.
A lot of paper too.
A lot of paper. Yeah, and we're working more and more towards having a paperless cockpit. We're probably somewhere on the spectrum. There's some companies that are purely paperless, and then there's us who still rely on some things to print up and mark on.
Yeah. Do the apps provide any way to like use an Apple Pencil and annotate anything?
I have one on my Mini, but I have not used it on the main one. I'm sure there are companies that use it, and they probably, I think SkyWest notably, I've heard they have their aircraft log on there, so they can actually write up things electronically and send it over to the maintenance team so that they can see what's going wrong or what's going right with the aircraft, all that. We still have a physical book that I'm looking at and writing things up and signing things off with. So we're not quite there, but I'm sure the pencil will come into play later.
Yeah. Is weather data at all offloaded right before a flight takes off, or is that in the EFB?
Yeah, I think I saw one of your questions involve, if you use a Wi-Fi or whatever. I'm more prone to use my phone as a hotspot.
Yeah.
But I can update the weather, and it'll put all the terrestrial-based, like ground-based radar, as well as some projections for like winds and for turbulence, so you can see that en route.
Yeah. And
you do that as close to taking off as possible. So later on, we're going to get, and I think some carriers already have, they have, of course, internet airborne,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get the Starlink system. And then I think in our company, it's slated for like the third quarter of this year.
Nice.
So that'll add a lot of utility to like you're asking about weather and displays as you go.
Yeah. So migrating from paper to digital, would you say the tool set, is it easier to work in this iPad setup? Is it without kind of dealing with finding the right page and kind of looking up the information that way versus having it more streamlined?
Yeah, it's good. We do use we call it a flight plan, or we call it a release.
Mm-hmm.
And that shows everything we've talked with the dispatcher for weather and fuel planning and all those things. We can see that on the iPad, and you can make annotations on it,
Mm-hmm.
But we're currently still using a paper version of that, just because I find just having a paper copy of the flight plan itself and being able to write on it kind of helpful,
Yeah.
just in flight. I'm sure you could do it on the iPad as well, and I've seen guys do that. I'm just not sure if it's as easy to work with. Or maybe I'm just old school. I don't know. I like having a little bit of paper.
Yeah.
I'd like to get it to where it was really only just the release I was looking at and writing on, and everything else was for reference on the iPad, for reading.
Yeah. And when you're flying, it's you and a co-pilot? Is that kind of the setup in there?
It just depends on the length of the trip. So we go either with 2, 3, or in some cases we'll do a 4-man crew.
Okay.
And
is that like,
and it would be, for
sleep?
girls and guys.
Does that allow for sleep if there's a long flight, especially?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have bunks downstairs in our plane. So we have a lower crew module we can hop down into. And if it's your turn to break, you can sleep down there easily.
Yeah.
And then we'll have, 2 people at all times in the cockpit.
Okay. Very cool. So, I want to just basics on piloting a bit. So,
sure.
Driving car, you're using pure visuals to kind of navigate. From my understanding, is this correct that piloting, you could basically pilot without a window with any visibility because you're using instrument panels, iPad with the map and everything, is altimeter, stuff like that. Would ask how much of that is accurate, or what kind of, yeah.
It's a good question. The iPad, in those instances when we're getting ready to land, is more, our land is more for reference.
Mm-hmm.
I'll look over and verify altitudes at certain fixes if we're coming in.
Yeah.
But we're looking at the screens on the plane, at the glass on the aircraft
Mm-hmm.
at that point, because it gives an excellent presentation for the landing.
Yeah.
It just depends on the weather. We can land by looking outside visually, and that's fine and works great.
Yeah.
And it's actually fun. Or we can have certain degrees of using automation and flying through weather and not seeing the ground, and having a visual presentation on the screens, and you kind of build it in your own mind where you're at, and then landing like that. Some of which we need to see a certain amount of visibility or ceiling to land.
Yeah.
And then others, if we're talking about like Cat 2, Cat 3 work, we have very minimal visibility needed. In the case of Cat 3, you can actually be landing with the weather below what you can actually see the airfield. Right. So we need more visibility just to taxi the aircraft. Yeah. To see the ground after we land. So that would be entailing like Cat 3 would be like an auto land where the plane can see. It uses that radio altimeter I was talking about earlier to actually flare. And we more monitor to make sure the aircraft is seeing everything it needs to see.
Yeah. No, very cool. And as far as, future evolutions of this that you can see, you mentioned like building this kind of stuff into the cockpit itself, larger screens and stuff like that. Would that be something that would benefit being able to manipulate kind of bigger surfaces to work with? Or
yeah, that could be where it's going. Certainly when we have internet on with, it's like ubiquitous throughout the plane, we'll be able to get better pictures on those screens and things like that. So not only will we have what the aircraft can see with its own radio or radar altimeter, with its own radar looking out, that builds a picture for us, would have actually maybe satellite footage or progs or things like that the weatherman can give us, updated on the iPad itself. So that would be a huge update going forward. Yeah. Rather than looking at stuff that's maybe, 5 or 6 hours old from when we took off, Yeah.
And
right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If we went to a class 3, then it would be all built into the aircraft. Mm-hmm. But that's tricky too, because then the manufacturer's involved. It has to pass certain criteria for the design, and those are all things that cost. Whereas, putting a mount on the side of the wall of the plane is something we have to go through the FAA to do, but changing out the iPad itself is relatively inexpensive compared to the hardware inside the aircraft.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned it interfaces with the plane, but it seems like a tricky balance. Like as far as seems like piloting historically, there's a lot of knobs and switches and very physical, tactile things you're working with versus just kind of thinking of cars, the Tesla model, where everything's just behind a screen. Where's that balance strike you for piloting?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Well, the interface with the iPad is totally different, right? Sort of pushing on an apps and switching.
Yeah.
In the aircraft, it's always going to be a varying degree of how much automation we're using. Like from fully automated, where the plane is basically fully managed and flying a course and everything down to the ground.
Yeah.
To something less than that, where I'm going to put speeds in the panel that I can dial up a speed or a heading or an altitude, and it's flying to that. And then back it up even further from that, we're actually hand flying.
Yeah.
So I can see what the flight director wants to do, but I'm actually manipulating flight controls to move the plane to that.
And
that would be basically all the different kind of automation through it.
Yeah. And I'd imagine the more weather and turbulence, the more manual, or as it get even more automated, the trickier it gets?
The more weather, probably the more reliance on automation, just so we can kind of manage it all easily. The aircraft actually, believe it or not, has a turbulence function. So it's able to feel the bumps and then put kind of a sine wave alternate to that, much like a noise canceling headset, into the flight controls to try and balance that out. And sometimes it works.
Sometimes, yeah.
Other times you're like, it's just, I'm not sure it's doing its job or not, but you could take it off and see if it's better or worse. But I imagine it's dampening out some of that,
Yeah. So I'm curious about some of the key apps you use on a regular basis. We've talked about them, but I guess Hawaiian Airlines has their own proprietary app, right? And what are all the functions this app provides? Like, do you have I'm not sure, you have a passenger itinerary, a list of how many people are on board and stuff like that, even, or
those are things that are passed through us through the ACARs. So the aircraft has its own printer, and so we get information for last minute details after they load the bags and all, for the performance for the aircraft based on the weight, the takeoff weight, and everything. And we also get all the specifics on number of passengers, where they're located, if there's any dogs on board downstairs, so I make sure to keep that compartment warm.
Yeah.
The weight CG, these things we all compare against what numbers we were expecting. So that's something the aircraft does, not necessarily done on the iPad anymore, and not something that's really passed over via the iPad. For this one, probably the primary function we use is that Jeppesen app I was telling you about for plates and moving maps. And it even has the GPS built into it. You can see not only your own aircraft or own ship on the moving map, but you can see it on the plates too. So as we're moving across the ground, getting ready to land, it's a big situational awareness tool to see where you are in reference to the fixes. You see your little plane tracking around.
The fixes meaning...
as you're flying an instrument approach, you're going to come up with an initial approach fix and a final approach fix.
I see.
These all have associated altitudes. For us, based on our own procedures, I'm going to be configured at one setting or not. When I hit the final approach fix, I'm going to be pretty much, if the weather's bad, at my approach speed with my final flap selected, with my gear down on a programmed descent rate. So it's all very stable.
Okay.
So it's nice to be able to see on the plate when that's coming up. And I can see on the aircraft instrumentation too, there's a horizontal situation indicator, like a glass that shows you like a God's eye view of where we are. But the both of them complement each other really well. The plate versus the aircraft systems.
Yeah. Does the app have any way to have predictive information for other planes in the sky as well?
Not yet. That would be something we could do in the future too, like ADS-B, which would show other aircraft around us. That's what we actually see on our screens in the aircraft.
Okay.
So that's where we're kind of using the iPad to set the aircraft up as far as altitudes and everything, and verifying everything. And then we're flying pretty much off the aircraft screens and just looking at this for reference.
I see. Yeah. And
if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And then the app itself, do you have to update its data like minutes before the flight? Can you do it that more 12 hours in advance, or how much before the flight do you have to get your iPad on some kind of internet to make sure it's up to date?
Yeah. Well, like before we push back, I'm usually got it hooked up to something in Honolulu. It's going to be hooked up to probably the company server,
Mm-hmm.
so I could check and make sure, or I might have checked it that morning. So it's not every minute; it's every few days.
Okay.
You'll get updates to plates and to en route information, and maybe additional features too, as the app is growing.
Okay. And then,
Yeah.
so you have your personal mini, then the 7th generation company iPad. Is the company iPad
Right.
pretty locked down, like as far as no Netflix and entertainment or leisure apps on that one, or are you able to install other apps?
Yeah. No, it's professionally managed, so that covers giving us access to Jeppesen.
Mm-hmm.
It also has, like Goodreader,
Yep.
we have our own app called Content,
Okay.
and it's access to really all the ship's logs, or not the ship's logs, ship's manuals.
Okay.
So I could basically see everything from how to perform or basically how to understand a system. We can pull those things up.
Yeah.
Like many, many manuals that we can see where normally we would have that on board the aircraft referencing it or carrying our own copy of it, which is a lot of weight.
Yeah.
So that's big. The content is big, and that also allows us to look at the release of the flight plan information that day. I can bring it up and read it in flight. So all your reference material is right there for en route.
Yeah. And so the iPads themselves are as you said, you have like a good reader comparable type app. Are those the only two apps you have, or do you have Safari? Like, what other apps do they have installed in the company?
We do have Safari. It's somewhat limited in that we can go to just pretty much company sites and different weather sites and all.
Mhm.
You're a little bit limited as to what you want to do with that. But that does work pretty good. The content app, which is kind of like Goodreader, it has a tremendous amount of information there, which would have been, a few years ago would have been like a couple of suitcases to carry around to get all those,
Yeah.
logs and stuff, the aircraft manuals and stuff. That's really been probably the second most often used app. Another one that we use is called CrewPad Pro, and it actually allows us to do computer-based learning right on the iPad,
Mhm.
which is nice. I could do it on my Mac at home or a PC, or I can do it here and I can pre-download the courseware and like listen to it en route, listen to it when it's quiet in the
nice.
aircraft over the water and stuff. So I can do some of that things we're required quarterly to do and annually to do simulator training as well as computer-based learning.
And is the courses, is it for new information about like new vehicles that the company might be getting, or is it just refreshing your knowledge on stuff you should already know?
It's refreshing what you
Okay.
know. So like in this, I think this round I'm going through has like a general overview, and then I'm going to be the systems we're going through this year or this quarter is going to be hydraulics and landing gear.
Mhm.
So every quarter is going to be a little bit different. And then I just got done with my recurrent training last month, so we did a little bit more systems and things as a group. We
Mhm.
actually met, and then at that time we work on like how to use the emergency equipment in the aircraft, how to deploy the slides and doors and stuff like that, hands-on kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and have a meeting kind of with management. And then we have, for us, we have 3 days of simulators to kind of go through all the things we can't do in the aircraft
Mhm.
and to present, new procedures and new things that we're trying to learn as a group kind of thing.
Okay. The simulators, what is that setup like? It's a physical recreation of the cockpit with like a screen that surrounds, simulate the view, or how advanced is that these days?
Yeah, they're very advanced. I think ours would be, I think it's a category C simulator. So it has, pretty much maybe 120 degrees up to down and like 180 or 200 degrees left to right view
Mm-hmm.
with several screens. I believe it's a Mylar kind of material they pull flat with a vacuum,
Yeah.
and they project on that with several cameras. I used to work in that community over for Boeing at Hickam with the C-17 simulators. So we would have like 3 cameras that would project, and they project, and they have little seams between them, but you can kind of gray that out, make it look right if you're good with visuals.
Mm-hmm.
So it does look really authentic when you're in it. And then it does full motion. So the modern ones don't use hydraulics anymore. What we had over at Hickam and what we have at Hawaiian, they're electronic jack screws to move the cockpit, as it were. It's on a 4 arms or 5 arms or something. And they're unique to each aircraft. So we have, yeah.
What are the cameras capturing that you were talking about?
They're actually projectors, so they're projecting the visuals for us to fly through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when we're practicing like low visibility stuff, like I was telling you about the Cat 2 or Cat 3, we can go ahead and address that in the simulator and try all the different iterations of what might go wrong and get familiar with that before we actually go and do it in the plane.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been enjoying the PlayStation VR 2, and they have the Gran Turismo 7, which is like a racing simulator, and I've got the racing wheel and pedals.
Okay.
And that experience is just it feels like I'm in like a high-speed racing car. So I can only imagine, corporations' money and building out these simulators for flying must just be incredible as far as how close they get to the real thing.
It gets really really close. And in fact, the ones we have, we get our typewriting in it. So when I go through all my training and I go through my simulators to learn the aircraft, I actually get typed in the aircraft in the simulator. It's that accurate.
Wow.
So all the things we can't do in the plane, like, losing an engine during the takeoff roll, before V1 or after V1, continuing to take off, coming back around with one engine and landing in instrument conditions, those things we can do very accurately in the sim with a high degree of accuracy. So you can see how it works and grade each other,
Yeah. When you were in the military, I'm not sure if you can speak to any of this. Did you have any dicey scenarios of trying to land an injured plane, in any regards to there?
I flew much older planes then. So the incidents of things breaking happened a lot more. When I was teaching, after I was in Europe, I taught at Little Rock in an older aircraft system, a C-130, but it was like a 62 or a 61 model.
Yeah.
So the planes are literally older than myself,
Yeah.
So they would happen. We would lose engines pretty routinely there. I would say maybe once a quarter or every 6 months. That does not happen in commercial aviation now.
Yeah.
In the plane I fly, in the Airbus 330, it's beautifully boring. There's very little that goes wrong with it. Mm-hmm. And so it's a nice thing. We kind of actually like that.
Yes.
There's very few times where people actually lose an engine. So yeah. And it's the engine technology has advanced to where it's extremely reliable, and the rolls we have on it are much more powerful than what we had back when I was doing cargo hauling in the military in the late 90s.
Yeah. Yeah. When my wife and I went to Africa for one of our big trips, we flew from, I think it was like Uganda to Zimbabwe, but it was basically just us and the pilot on this tiny like propeller plane that was like from the 1950s. Yeah. It was a very surreal experience. It was, my wife was up in the cockpit with the pilot. It was a very cool experience, but some of those older planes, it does feel a bit more precarious.
Well, some of them are relying on systems that are very analog and not as well done as some of the more modern. Like our engines today have their own contract. They're leased for the aircraft, where we have one company that leases the aircraft to us, and we have another company that's taking care of the engines. They're that advanced. And Rolls does a really nice job on our motors. So
yeah. So outside of the main flight navigation app and the continuing education, and you mentioned the kind of good reader type app, what else is there on the iPads that you guys are issued with?
Yeah, there's just a couple more. We use one called it's just basically for anti-icing. So that one is made by the company. It's by a third party vendor, but it takes into account the types of fluids we're using, what kind of precipitation we're in, and the timing of all that. So it'd start the clock when they just finish the de-icing. You see them run around the outside of the airplane with the trucks.
Yeah.
And then it takes into account what kind of fluid, whether it's something that's a de-ice or an anti-ice. And then based on what temperature it is outside and what kind of precipitation we're up against, it'll come up with a timing for how long we could be on that, and then before we'd have to like look at the wings or stop and go back and get more de-icing going.
There's never a situation mid-air where it's like ice rain coming down and things get frozen over because things are so hot, or other situations where that becomes an issue.
We have onboard systems that take care of that for both the engine and the wings and the empennage to warm it up. But there are situations where you would get where the weather is worse than what we can actually, provide against, and we would move out of that weather.
Yes, yeah.
Either climb or get around that weather or not fly through that weather. We don't do anything that's severe, either icing or turbulence.
Okay.
So if those are forecasted or present, then we don't do those things.
Okay, gotcha. Any other
That's
apps?
a good question.
Yeah,
we have some company-specific apps that get us access to different types of information daily, like, what crews are flying with, where we're going and everything. And that's kind of proprietary, but it's interesting. And then we have one that we've just started called Intellex, which actually we're able to send a report or a notice if something goes wrong to the company and then subsequently to the FAA so they can investigate those things. And it's not usually for any kind of punitive purposes. It's usually just so they can track those kinds of things and see if they see any trends or problems. I lost my hydraulics landing coming back from Vegas a few weeks. Actually, I'm sorry, from LA a few weeks ago, like 2 weeks ago. And that took out the main braking system and took out the steering, like the nose steering. So once we'd gotten, safely off the runway and turned it over to the folks that tow the plane in, then I could use that app that actually report what happened. And then the maintenance guys see that, our operations people see that. And then eventually the FAA actually called and got to me and said, what was happening with that. And they could ask follow-on questions too. So that's a great, use of the iPad for distributing information to everybody like that.
And, are there like industry magazines or publications that you guys have? And is that something that the iPad's kind of used for at all?
We have those. I actually get a hard copy of, and ours just comes from a union, so you can kind of see what other carriers are doing. Nothing professionally that we're reading that has to do with systems or operations. All that kind of material would come through the good reader version, our content in the form of like company memos, aggregated company memos where it'll be all hyperlinked in there. We can read them about, 5G interference with the plane or new procedures at an outstation going into Austin. That's all present in that reading program. It's not a professional publication that does that.
Is there a standard protocol procedure if someone leaves something on an aircraft, like the lost and found system? What is supposed to happen if it's not stolen from a future passenger?
Yeah, I think that in the back of the plane, they probably have a lost and found at that airport with that carrier.
Yeah.
For us, like if I leave something behind, and we're famous for leaving things behind,
right?
Usually the next crew will recognize, oh, that's Milt's, he's left his iPad or his hat, or something. And so if they're kind, they'll give it to the station manager. So when I come back for the aircraft, I'll get it. Or if I already left and went home, they'll bring it and put it in. We have our own lost and found.
Yeah.
Inside ops, so I can go retrieve my hat, that kind of thing.
Very cool. Do you pilot like smaller planes, like as a hobby thing? It seems weird to say, but do you fly for fun as well outside of the big commercial jets these days?
Yeah, I don't actually. Yeah. I have friends that do that and fly up at Dillingham and fly gliders and things like that. I don't. I have other things I like to do, but not who's to say I might do something like that in the future. I don't know.
Yeah. For those that do fly on the smaller planes, you're mentioning what's the main kind of app store app for flying?
From what I understand, and I've got a subscription to it, but Foreflight seems to be very popular in that community, and it incorporates a lot of good information for general aviation like that. So like in Hawaii, you might have flown on Mokulele that flies the Caravans or Makani Kai. Yeah. I think some of those carriers are using that in the cockpit, or they may use that and Jeppesen. I don't know. It's been a few years ago I flew with them and noticed they were using that, and it does a nice job of presenting that information for them.
And it's similar information from what you use?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
very similar to what we use for Jeppesen. It's just a different company that's puts that out.
Okay.
So, but I really shouldn't speak to it because I don't have a lot of experience. Sometimes I'll run the Jep app on our company iPad, and I'll run Foreflight because I think it has another layer of information for weather and stuff on the side, so I can see both screens moving, and I might have a better idea of what we're going into besides the aircraft's own radar. So, but I don't do it every flight, and I'm just kind of learning myself on that.
Yeah. And in your experience, how widespread is the iPad in commercial piloting? Is it does every airline have this as a pretty standard thing? Do some use Android tablets or Surfaces, or is iPad the predominant?
That's a good question. We actually initially we had a Dell product that we used when we first had an electronic flight bag. Then we went to the Surface Pro, and then we found that the folks that write the app for us were not going to support the Windows-based machine. So everybody was pretty much migrating over to the iPad. So I think now it's not every carrier, but probably the vast majority of them would use an iPad running either some semblance of Goodreader or their own. Like our content is like Goodreader, and it's professionally managed. So I just have to update it, and all my publications and all my manuals get updated for me. So they probably run with something like that, and they probably run with Jeppesen. So that seems to be the gold standard for commercial aircraft.
Okay. Do you also do you have a company issue phone as well, or what other kind of tech do you get from the company?
No, we don't have phones. They do have some cellular connections at some of the gates for us to update things, and that's nice. But no, we don't have phones issued to us or anything. And in fact, my iPad, I had a cellular card in it, like a virtual SIM for a while. And I found it was actually a little quicker on hooking up to my phone if my phone had a 5G set. So I discontinued, having the chip in it, but the company doesn't provide that or anything.
Okay.
I think their idea would you'd use a Wi-Fi, signal in your hotel or maybe at the airport and update things before you get on the plane. I kind of like being able to do it, right as we're pushing back off my phone.
Yeah. And is the iPad something you use outside of piloting? You mentioned you had an iPad mini. Kind of what role does it serve in your broader life? Do you do much computing itself on it?
Yeah, I'm probably more apt to be on an iOS device. I have a Mac, but everybody in the, that stays with me or lives with me has pretty much a sign-on, so we just kind of share it, for doing things. And I like it for some activities, but I think probably the iOS and what's on the iPad is easier and simpler for me to travel with and to use. And my needs are pretty simple too. So I don't really need a heavy computing machine. I'm not doing like Final Cut Pro or anything like that.
Right.
So I might be editing some pictures or some short videos, but I'll use it to check mail and run through some things and delete some things. And I like both the Mac OS and the iOS, but I probably am gravitating towards using more of an iOS device for my daily.
Yeah. Do you, as far as the life of a pilot, do you get to take advantage of your destinations at all? Do you have like a couple days in different cities to like explore? And do you have a fancy camera you bring with you to are you into that kind of stuff, or what do you do to play?
I did for a while. I carried a small Sony, like a mirrorless.
Yeah.
But I found that the cameras and the phones now were so good.
Yeah.
And I bought a lens through Moment, so I have like a 58 millimeter lens for the iPhone. I've got a 3 mini.
Yeah.
It can just like connect to that, so it takes really nice pictures. So I don't really bring the camera along so much. As far as like where we go and having time, that's very carrier specific. So we're lucky at Hawaiian. We have shorter trips and we have longer trips. I'm currently real junior in the left seat, so I'm just a reserve guy. I wait until other people call out for a trip, whether they're sick or something. And so I get a whole plethora of trips going everywhere, but I don't get to really choose where I'm going to go. When I was more senior in the right seat, I would do like a 5-day Auckland, New Zealand every month and go ride bikes and spend time outside there. And that was kind of my jam. Either that or I was spending a lot of time in New York City and Boston too. Those are both longer layovers. We had like 4-day trips there, so you could have a couple days to kick around.
Yeah. And your routes to these days, is it primarily Japan, Seattle, San Francisco? Are those kind of some of the big? What are some of the big destinations you do these days?
Yeah, that's also carrier dependent. So for Hawaiian, I think we've currently got 4 spots in Japan. We've got Korea. So we go to Incheon. We go to Tahiti and American Samoa for the island destinations. We're just opening up the Cook Islands. It's going to be on our smaller Airbus. We do all the inter-island here, as well as all the West Coast. And in my aircraft, we do Boston, Austin, and New York City on the East Coast.
You go Hawaii to Boston as with the direct layover?
It's the longest domestic flight in the U.S. So yeah, you'd have to like go all the way down to another island, or like Lahui or something to get it to go longer.
That's wild.
It is the longest route.
Yeah, I moved from Hawaii to New Hampshire, just an hour north of Boston. So I looked at a map, it's like it's as far as I can pretty much go. But that's cool. There's direct.
You could go direct.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, you could do directs. I think we have a 4-day and a 3-day, so it's probably not daily service just yet in Boston. When the route becomes mature, it's pretty much all 3-day trips. Like our JFK route is every day, and it's a 3-day over footprint for the crew to be gone for 3 days.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think you can come over from Boston quite easily.
That's really cool to hear. How did you actually get into flying? Like, what inspired you to join the Air Force and get into this?
I think mostly my dad was kind of, telling me it might be a fun career, and he got me into building models when I was smaller. So I had kind of a general interest in aviation.
Yeah.
Read about it when I was younger, when I was a boy, and then when I got time for university, I was lucky and I was able to choose a university that had a little bit of flying program, but they also had an ROTC attachment, so I could come in the Air Force and get a flying slot that way. So that was. Otherwise, I didn't come from a family that had a lot of flying in the background. There's no other pilots.
Right. Yeah.
There wasn't really any military background or, real wealth to do that. So the military was a great way for me to learn the flying skills and to do that. So,
was it a challenge to actually get into the piloting end of things? Because I know when you join the Air Force, you're not guaranteed to fly, right?
Right. It was challenging in university, just getting a slot. And then once you get at that location for your initial year, we did have a pretty good washout rate. I think we started with 36 and we ended up with graduating like 20 or 21 of us.
Yeah.
So it was a few people that went on to do other careers in the Air Force. So yeah, it is competitive. But once you get through that process, then it's much more learning, as needed, like what schools and courses you go to.
Yeah, very cool. Well, to close it out, I just have to ask a very, just lighthearted question about there's a new movie called Plane by Gerald Butler, 300 star. Yeah. Have you seen it? Do you have any thoughts as to the dramatic opening and crash landing and?
I haven't seen it. I've heard people talk about it, so I'm going to have to go watch it. The ones that really, to me, that stand out in my mind that are very accurate representations of what might happen was, of course, Sully with Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
I think is a brilliant movie, if not for the actual accident, but for going through the accident investigation. That mindset of facing off with people at an NTSC board, and what's important with the flight and taking care of passengers. That one's excellent. And then the Denzel Washington one with for Flight, that flight or that crash scene there really was emotional and moving to watch. But I thought that was also a really good, maybe not a good picture of pilots,
right?
But I mean, it was an entertaining view of aviation nonetheless.
Yeah, when I watched Flight, I had no idea it was really a movie about kind of depression and addiction, which is and then Castaway is another one that I just it hits me a lot.
That one with Tom Hanks again going
Tom
down
Hanks,
on that. I think it was a FedEx, maybe a DC-10 or an MD-11. I can't remember.
Yeah, but
that scene was really hard to watch. It was really, I think, very realistically driven though.
Yeah.
I don't take my boots off in flight since that movie. So
yeah.
I mean, I think he spent like half the movie looking for his boots.
Yeah, right. As far as the size of aircrafts, like freight size planes for that kind of stuff, is that something that you've ever flown, something in that size category?
Well, Yeah, the Airbus we're flying now, the
Hmm.
330 is around just under 300 passengers, depending on the configuration. But
Yeah.
ours is, I think, 295
Hmm.
for a full boat. It's every bit as big as what FedEx is using for their cargo.
Okay.
And then I've flown dedicated cargo planes that were just slightly bigger. Like the
Hmm.
C-17 has a little bit more uh, a gross weight capability. It's a 4 engine versus 2 engine, so it can like carry a little bit more weight.
Yeah.
But overall size and all, they're very comparable. You'd have to get into like maybe a 747, which a few carriers still
Hmm.
fly to get it a little bit bigger than that. But everybody's kind of gravitating towards twins now, just because the motors are very reliable, and having just two motors for the purposes of maintenance and doing the servicing all is a much cheaper operation.
Yeah. Do you know, have they been, is fuel efficiency something that they've improved over the years? I don't even know kind of the status of improvements with that stuff.
Yeah, vastly improved with the newer, the what they call the next generations. We've got a 321
Hmm.
Airbus, and it has a gear-driven fan. So it's almost like a ducted propeller for a very large fan. It can't fly quite as high,
Hmm.
but it just sips gas. It's really much more
Interesting.
fuel efficient.
Yeah.
And then those motors, they're scaling them up, and the Airbus is coming out with a larger version of what we fly, the 330 Neo.
Hmm.
I mean, it's just a few more passengers, but the motors are more efficient. And
Yeah.
then our company is shifting over to the 7.8s, and the 7.8s have similarly designed engines, so they're more efficient. Not necessarily bigger. I think we're within 10 passengers of each other, and
Hmm.
very, very similar size between the 787 and a 330.
Yeah.
Those are both very popular airframes for long distance.
Hmm.
But the ones we've got, the 787s coming, I think we get our first one in like third or fourth quarter this year. They have much more efficient motors, much more newer engines on them.
Yeah. Very cool. And I've heard, is it true, like, do you guys fly as well, like parcels and the cargo as well? Is that like, do you have partnerships with like whatever FedEx or UPS, or do they do everything on their own airplanes?
We have both now. So
Hmm.
in our aircraft, I can fly with a mix of people and cargo, or I
Hmm.
can do more dedicated cargo.
Yeah.
During COVID, we had runs that we were doing just purely cargo,
Right. Because
and
there's
I would
not as many
fly.
passengers at that point. Yeah.
Right, or we had no passenger. I
Right.
flew with no passengers and went all the way from Incheon direct to LA with just cargo.
Yeah.
And so it's just we're lucky we have a very large cargo hole.
Hmm.
We have systems on the plane that are made for moving palletized cargo and things around, so you're not just like floor loading stuff.
Yeah.
So we're lucky with that. And then we're also, as a company, we've got a contract with Amazon that's going to begin towards the end of this year, and
Hmm.
we'll have a dedicated freight aircraft in the same 330, but it'll just be for purely for freight.
Oh, very cool. Well,
Yeah.
is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to before we kind of wrap it up?
Boy, no, I think you asked some really good questions about where it's all going, and electronic flight bags as they're getting more modern and how they're going to be more integrated in the aircraft. That's really nice to kind of look at what is happening future. Your question with the engines is also really good, because the more efficient motors, they tend to move more air, not as fast.
Hmm.
Like bigger, the fans are getting larger and larger,
Yeah.
and that's why they're using the gears to gear it down to where they can spin a bigger blade at a slower rate
Hmm.
and move more air. But differentially, we're not moving the air that much faster, but
Yeah.
it becomes quieter and a lot more efficient. So that's the big key.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. 'Cause, I, of course, wear the noise canceling headphones, but I'll be kind of curious to just hear the
Right.
cabin noise as more modern solutions come up. If you'll need less of that, maybe.
Yeah, I took off in a 787 just as a jump seater with an American flight, and they were really good to me. I got to sit in the center seat, right behind the pilots,
Hmm.
and watch it, because I'm like a dog looking at a watch. It's a
Yeah.
modern Boeing cockpit, and I just noticed, the print on the panels is really large. I'm like, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But when they put the thrust up, it was noticeably quieter than my aircraft,
Yeah.
and the motors are located, very similarly on the wing. They were just that much quieter with the higher bypass fans.
Yeah.
So like in our
Mhm.
aircraft, maybe 70% of the airflow going in the engine goes around the core. It just
Mhm.
goes through the fan. It doesn't get heated or anything. It just
Mm.
gets pushed. These are going to have even more bypass. It may be approaching 80 or 85%
Mhm.
around the core, more slowly, but larger volumes of air.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, engines are cool.
Yeah. No, I love that stuff. Yeah. This has been a fascinating discussion. This is great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah. If you get follow up too, and you want to have a second, podcast as a follow on or something with more questions, just reach out.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Any websites or social media that you'd like to promote? I'm not sure.
Sure. I'm not a huge social media person. I look at a couple things on Twitter. I do have an Instagram site. You're welcome to follow me on that. It's just at RoadMilt, 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 and we take pictures of flying and destinations and where we're going and family and stuff. So it's a lot of fun.
Very cool. Well, excellent. Thank you so much, man. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah, you're very welcome.
Well, that was my interview with Milt. My thanks again to Milt for his time recording this episode, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. You can support this show over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. With that said, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.